I apologized that I'd only had a chance to read a little of his book in preparation for the interview. "I don't expect you to read every part of it," McCain replied, with a gesture that suggested he might not have gotten all the way through this one himself. And here Salter, who was no longer drawing a salary from the insolvent campaign and derives the bulk of his income from McCain book royalties, began to look more seriously dismayed. The conversation continued in that vein for a spell. I'd riffled enough pages of hard call to recognize that McCain was trying to bolster his tenuous credentials as an executive by associating himself with heroic figures like Churchill, Reagan, and Truman. Some of the leaders he considered in the book cast a spell through charisma, others through domineering energy, still others through a broad vision of change. But McCain himself didn't seem like any of those leaders, I pointed out. He wasn't charismatic, had little vision of the future, and was more satirist than autocrat. No argument from the author here either. "Whether I'm a leader in the category of people I was just talking about, I think is doubtful," he said. At this point, I glanced over at Salter, whose face was now buried in his hands. Off message, McCain merrily went. What, I asked, did he think about his new best friend, George W. Bush, as a leader? Why wasn't he in the book? "I think that the very significant failing was to not question the course of the war in Iraq for too long," he said. "I'm told that the president would say to the generals on the teleconference, 'Do you have everything you need?' 'Yes, sir.' End of conversation. I think General Eisenhower would have said, 'Well, what about the casualties in Anbar province? What about the suicide bombers?' He'd go down the list of challenges we were facing. How's it going with the debathification? What's happening with the oil revenues?" I noted Bush's curious quality of taking strenuous opposition as proof that he must be right. McCain concurred. "I really feel that to somehow be encouraged by opposition is not a productive exercise," McCain replied. "Because if you continue to have American public opinion opposed to our involvement in Iraq, no matter what I think the consequences of failure are, we're not going to be able to sustain it. Period." When I got back to my office, there was a message from Salter saying he hoped I hadn't misconstrued any of those comments as, critical of the president. As McCain and I chatted, I found myself transported back to January 2000 on the Straight Talk Express. This was the name given the campaign bus on which the candidate rode around New Hampshire and South Carolina, holding court in the conversation pit with a clack of reporters. More broadly, the Straight Talk Express was McCain's whole caffeinated roadshow, which lurched intermodally from town hall to fundraiser to debate, nearly upsetting the frontrunner George W. Bush and threatening to overturn the entire Republican establishment. To most of those who were aboard at any point, the Express remained a high-water mark in covering presidential politics. Part of it was, of course, the free-flowing access, which if you'd chased after Bush, Gore, or most any other candidate, felt like nickel beer after Prohibition. Campaigns ration a candidate's unscripted availability in an effort to stay on message, control his image, and avoid gaffes. But the McCain team took the opposite approach, allowing the candidate to gab so carelessly that his slips ceased to be newsworthy. In the beige-leathered lounge area, the daily dialogue tended to begin with badinage, delve into political tactics, then dabble in policy, before collapsing into something resembling a conversation among humans about whatever anyone felt like talking about. When the bus stopped, McCain got out and did the same thing with voters at his town hall meetings, indulging in free associative humor and answering questions about everything with spontaneity and sympathy. McCain's openness, his incredible life story, and his renegade persona bred a camaraderie and admiration that threatened to break out into the open. The shorthand for the affection the press developed for the candidate was the swoon. McCain's combination of principled belief and subversive nature made him into an unexpected creature, the Republican dissident. A conservative patriot, he had no respect at all for authority, especially that of his party's moneyed establishment. His struggle with conscience was fascinating to watch. McCain would behave like an ordinary politician and then flagellate himself mercilessly for having done so. The moment that encapsulates that best for me was McCain's apology for an especially egregious act of pandering, when he said that he saw the Confederate flag flying over the South Carolina State House as a symbol of heritage.